All right, welcome back. We are Game 2007. That's Multiplayer Game Design 1 in the winter 2026 semester at Georgian. And it's week 8, part 3 of our broadcast and recording together. And the last part, what we did was we made a very simple user interface, right? And what you should have right now is when you have your player, you can bring up this little inventory box that comes up here. Is this what you have, my friends? Are you with me on this? Because if you don't have this, then you may have done something different. Again, notice the spacing between each of the items. Again, the way this was created, there's two things that are going on here. So if we look at, before we move on, I want to point this out to you. So if you kind of hover, if you kind of, filter for character, let's look at character 0. So character 0 is, kind of the this character right here, the character on the right. And if I scroll down, right, then you can see that there is character stats. But if you keep scrolling down, there's also inventory, right? So you can actually filter for this. So if I go to inventory, you can see that there are an array of 8 items from 0 to 7. And each of the items is empty, okay? And the item name is none. There's nothing in there at all. It's all empty. The item IDs are all empty. That's why it says none, like so, okay? And notice that I can't click on any of them. None of them are accessible. They're not like they're not something that I have my mouse, but when I kind of press tab, my mouse goes away, okay? That's how that's the expected behavior. Same thing here. So if I go to character 1. That's the other character, this one here on the left. And again, it's the same thing. So each of the items in inventory, there's physically 8 inventory slots. And I know this because they're 8 slots array. It's an array of 8 items that we can hold right now, okay? And this is good. Otherwise, to understand how this is working, just to make sure you guys get it, is on the left, if you look at inventory properties, and if you go to, let's also put this player inventory HUD there. We'll put this under inventory properties so we can see it. So we'll just do that. If you look at the inventory itself, you can see that it's empty. There's no value. There's nothing in here. The array is empty completely. But when we launch this for the first time, well, then it becomes, kind of something that we can see. Okay, so this is good. That means we're building an inventory of 0, of nothing. But let's think about this now on how we're going to make it work. This is the next part. So the next part is we want to change our base interactable. We're going to hover between the two. Right now, all I want to do is I want to be able to pick up, not potions for today, just my sword and my shield. If I can pick those two things up, I'm happy, right? The potions will come later, but for now, sword and shield. Okay? So what I want to do here is in my base interactable, let's go to that first. So we're gonna kind of bounce between the two things. So go back to blueprints, interactables, base interactable. And what it says here is I want to add the following inventory variables: item data table, item info, and item name. So let's do that. So I'll add in item data table. Again, this will be of type data table, object reference, right? And I'll pull this up so you guys can see a little bit easier. This is going to be of type inventory properties. So again, here, inventory properties, right? These ones, interactor is within radius, and a bunch of other stuff here. This would be, let's add a kind of category for this if you haven't done it already. This will be interaction properties. Just that they're moved away. Is consumable, is equipable. I mean, we're going to leave it as interaction properties, but you can also argue that would be an inventory thing. Maybe eventually we will. Equipable type. you know, we'll move it away so we can just filter right now. Okay. But, you know, eventually we're going to come back to this. Character, that's important too. We have character and interact key. That's definitely interaction properties. Character, we'll put it under interaction properties for now, but we'll come back to that. So now all we have is item data table, compile and save, and the item data table is blank. Don't fill this in. We're going to be tempted to do that, but we're going to find it by ourselves. Next, we want to add in item info and item name. So item info of type BPS. It's our struct, right? Item info. And this is going to be inside of the inventory properties. Okay. And then item name, which is going to be of type name. There we go. All right, so that's what you should have right now. Compile and save. So a couple things to note. This is for the interactable itself, like the thing that you're interacting with, whether it's a door or sword or key, whatever, right? It's for all of them, okay? Next, what we want to do is we want to continue with the base interactable, and let's change the event begin play. So again, I'm going back to the event graph, double click on the event begin play. It's going to take me to this area right here. We want to add a sequence node. So this is the first thing we add in, sequence node. I'm going to pull this up here a little bit. So the old stuff, this stuff here that we had in there, is going to be part of the first sequence. And all we want to do is, after all this, we're going to add in another sequence that sets the item data table. So item data table, we're going to set here. And I want to do this interactively like this. After the, you know, each of the base interactables has been created, it's going to reference a data table for us to access, as opposed to me setting it manually. So there's advantages to this. It sets them all, right? As opposed to setting them individually. Now you could set them individually afterwards as well. If you have multiple item data tables, you could do that. But for this one, all I want to choose is DT underscore item data. That's the one I'm going to choose. So that sets up the data table for all of them. Next, once we've done the data table, then I want to go into base weapon. Let's go there. So this is specifically for the weapon now. So if I go to weapons, base weapon, which is our sword, right? And you're going to see on the right some stuff. Inventory properties are here, right? Well, the item name is very important. Let's change the item name to sword. Because remember, we have two things, item name and item ID, right? So item name is going to be something we want to use. Item info, we could certainly change it here manually, but why? We want to search for that in the table. We have a table for this. So it makes more sense for us just to search for it in the table based on the name of the item. So the only thing we have to do is just add the name in here. Later on, our base interactable could be called something else. Maybe we'll make a sword based on the base interactable. But for now, that's what we're going to do. Let's just kind of show you what we got here. So sword. I could change the data table here like it shows here in the graph. I'm not going to for a second, and let's see if it matters, right? Next, I also want to do the same thing since we're going to do both sword and shield. It doesn't say this in the PowerPoint, but let's go do the same thing for shield. So under shield, again, where it says under inventory properties, instead of it being sword, that's the default because the base interactable, sorry, the base weapon is a sword and shield inherits from base weapon. But let's change this to shield. Let's override that. Okay, final save. So we've done sword and shield. We've done those two things. The next thing we want to do is go back to the base interactable. Let's do that. So keep the base weapon open. Back to the base interactable. What we want to do is we want to add a new function called add inventory item. So new function, add inventory item, and this is where the fun begins. So how does this work? Let's add a sequence node. Here's our sequence node. And first, let's think about this a bit. If I just add an item, if I say inventory add, it's actually going to add on to the array. I don't want that. I already have 8 inventory items. What I want to do is I want to find an empty item. So first part is let's find an empty item. So I want to get the character. So here's our character. And I want to get the inventory. Here's the inventory. And I want to, from there, find item. But I'm not finding any specific item. I'm looking for an empty item. This is how you do it. You can look for one that has like nothing. Doesn't have anything in it. When I find it, what I want to do, so this is the part that find empty item. The first empty item, if you will. Right? That's what this is. So once we've found the empty item, then what I want to do is I want to, let's get these two things again. I want to set that item with my new item info. So let's set array element, right? And the item index is going to be the thing that I found. So here's the item index. And the item is going to be my item info. This item info is the information of the item based on whatever this thing is. If it's a, sword or shield or something else. Okay. So that's this first node, this first thing that we're doing. We're kind of setting it up. And what this does is it actually modifies the inventory, physical inventory array. So set array element. That's what it does to the item we picked up. To item picked up. So first we find an empty, and then we set that one to the item we picked up. Next, we want to update the inventory UI. So there's two parts. There's the array that's in the character, and the second part is the UI that the character is going to see. All right, so let's do that. So again, get the character, and we want to get a reference to the HUD. Get player inventory HUD. But I just don't want to get this. I want to get a validated get because I don't know if I'm accessing it, if it's going to be valid yet. So I want to protect it just to make sure that it's valid. All right, it's a good practice. Realistically, we could also check to see if the character is valid before we get into this altogether. So when adding an inventory, check to see if the character is even valid. We have a valid character reference. If we don't, that'd be a problem. Then we want to rebuild the inventory on the server this time. So rebuild inventory server. We're going to call that one. And what this does is it just updates the inventory UI. Updates inventory UI. So two parts, right? The physical array that's on the character, and then what the character sees are two parts, two different pieces to it, to the puzzle. By the way, this is nothing to do with multiplayer. You'd have to, other than this part, rebuild on server. You have to rebuild either way, right? Because what we're doing is we're showing an image, an empty image, and then we're swapping that image with whatever you just picked up, right? So you'd have to do it kind of the exact same way if you were having an inventory system, that was standalone, like for a standalone player. All right, very, very good. Then we need to be able to get the information. We have to kind of, pull the data table for, based on the item name of the item that's being picked up. What is the item detail? What are the item details? Kind of thing. And so let's do that. Let's add another function called get item info. And then get item info is going to take the item data table, get item data table. And that item data table, we're going to get data table row, get data table row, this one. And we want to use the row name as the item name. So whatever the item name is, we want to use that as a way of indexing the row. So the item name is key, the one we put in on the item itself, right? Each individual item, that's the row name. So if the row is found, then we want to set the item info. So set item info if the row is found to whatever that outbound information is from the row. Okay, and this little thing is what we need to look up the item in the data table. So look up the item in the data table. That's what we're doing here, and we're doing it by item name. By item name. Otherwise, how are you going to know what that item is? Instead of what you could do is individual items like sword and shield and blah, 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 and let's say you have another 100 items, you can actually manually put them all in yourself if you want to. But what happens if you want to make a global change, right? That's where it becomes less efficient, because then I have to go to the base item and change that, whereas I can just go to a data table and I can look at the entire data table myself in one big table, one big view. It's much more efficient than changing individual items. Okay? Compile and save. All right, so now that we've done that, then we need to use it. So back to base weapon. Let's go do that. So base weapon, and if I go to the event begin play, we do a couple things here. We make it rotate and bounce, but we also want to get the information. So we want to get item info, get item info. And this comes from the base class base interactable, right? So what it does is when the weapon is, or any weapon, base weapon, or shield in this case, once they're instantiated or they're placed in the world, the information about what they're about, the image of it and all that stuff, you can also add other information. Right now we don't have a lot in our data table. We can add things like the damage it does, how much money it costs, like in terms of gold or whatever. Maybe there's an experience value when you pick it up for the first time. All these things we can add in to the data table, right? As almost like a stat table for the weapon. All right, so that's what this is. And then what we want to do is in the event interact, let's do that now. So let's go back to the event interact here. We want to change the event interact. There's two parts to it now. So we'll have a sequence node. And the sequence node will look like this. The old equip weapon, that'll go on the second sequence now, down here. Okay? But the first thing we want to do is when we're interacting with a weapon, we want to add it to inventory. So add inventory item. So this happens on the weapon, but not on a potion. And it doesn't happen right now on a door or a key, right? Right now we're testing it just on weapons to see how this works. But this thing we're making perhaps doesn't belong here. It might belong on the base interactable, right? We test to see if it's something that's equipable or that's something that's consumable. If it's equipable or consumable, we can put it on. If a tool or whatever, as long as it's not a door. We don't want to equip a door on our back, kind of thing, because it's also an interactable type. So is an NPC. We don't want to put an NPC in our backpack unless it's that kind of NPC, right? But for the most part, that's how it works. This thing here. All right, so now this should be everything. Let's try this out and see if it works. And now we're going to do some troubleshooting. So let's press play, and let's see how this works. So again, if I open up my inventory, you can see I have nothing. If I approach my sword, and if I come close in contact with it, and I press E, well, what happened? And it doesn't show up, right? So we need to do some troubleshooting here to see what happened, because we should see it in the inventory right now, right? Well, let's see, did we actually have it in the array? That's the first part. So again, to check this, I'm going to click on characters 1, and let's see what we've got here in terms of our inventory. So this is the first thing we check. So if we look at our first inventory item, you can see that we didn't pick up anything. You can see that the items weren't picked up at all, right? So that wasn't allocated. And they're not put down here, so there's nothing inside this at all, right? All right, well, let's try for the other character. So we're going to go to this one and go over to this. Now, the inventory item's not picked up, and we'll pick it up, and then we'll show the inventory item, and again, no show, right? So this is not a good scenario because we're not seeing the inventory item. What about character 0? If I go to character 0, again, you can see that whether I picked on character 1 or character 0 right now, nothing in the inventory. And that's bad. So the inventory actually wasn't added somehow. Okay, so what did we miss? Let's take a look. Well, we have these errors that come up. Okay. So this is kind of a common error that happens where it says get data table row, get data table info, as an example. So it's trying to get the item data table from the item data table itself. And the question is, did the item data table get added in? All right, that's kind of the first part we have to check. So remember how we're adding it. In the base interactable in the event graph, we're adding it here, right? So when the event begin play, we're getting the item data table. So let's see what the items are that we're getting. All right, so again, if I press play, without interacting with the characters themselves, let's look at, kind of a base weapon. So if I go to base weapon, what do I see? Well, automatically you can clearly see that the item data table is not loaded, right? But it should be, right? Because in the base interactable, in the event begin play, the data table was loaded, wasn't it? So that's a problem. That's the first problem we have to conquer. So why? Why does this happen? We'll get the same error again. So why is this not going on? Why is this not happening? Because it's not even configuring the item in the first place. Can anyone tell me why? We have to talk about this, my friends, because you're going to have these errors and you need to know how to resolve them. Logan says, I'm not completely sure. Okay. Anyone else? Why would it be this way? We're trying to set the data here, through the event begin play, right? Item data table. We're doing it for all base interactables, right? And then somehow, even though we're setting it, the DT item data isn't being loaded. Okay, let's do it manually instead. So if I go to item data table, you can just set it DT item data like this. Okay, and let's just disconnect this one, right? There's two ways of doing it, this way or this way. So compile and save, and let's press play. And now let's take a look at the base weapon. Look, now we're getting data. Are you with me? So let's talk about this from a procedural perspective. And I did this on purpose to show you guys how things work. Remember that what's happening is order of execution, right? Just like it's in Unity. The execution order is very important. When we think about instantiation, so I have instantiated an object. Objects are of type base interactable, right? But the object doesn't exist yet, right? And we're trying to save the item data table, which is this. And I'm going to show you this thing right here. Here's the item data table right here. The item data table is trying to load it, and it loads it, but it does it before it's been created. And then it gets created. The new items are instantiating from, they're inheriting from this thing here, base interactable, right? So it's just that order of execution. So that's why this is no good, right? We don't need to do it this way, right? I'm just stating this just in case you're like, well, I want to set it manually, right? Well, you can't set it manually because, automatically, because in this case, either you can put a delay, which is kind of ugly, or you can you can put it in here like this, right? So that's the first thing. So now this might be the cause of our problems. Let's start it and stop it, and we're not getting any more errors. That's the first thing. Let's start it again. So starting it again, let's see now if we're able to get the information. So if I go over to the sword, and I get close enough and I pick it up, and if I press tab, hey, look at that, there's a sword, and look at that, I can hover over and I get the hover effect. I can actually select my sword because there's an item in there. I can't do that with these items. These items are empty, but I can do it with this item. Okay, so that's sword. Well, I should be able to do the same thing with shield, and you can see that that's the case. All right, so sword and shield. Well, let's see if this works for my other character. So if I kind of go here and I go over to my sword, let's actually pick it up in the different order. Let's pick it up shield first and then sword. And if I pick it up, you can see shield is first and then sword. And we have our first kind of simple inventory. Are you with me? Good things and bad things here about this, and I got to talk about it. One, again, one thing that we have is if I use my arrow keys, right, you can clearly see that I can arrow between the two things. So I can arrow to the left and to the right. Try it. But I can't go to these ones. So this is another way of selection. I can arrow to the left or arrow to the right. Okay. The other thing we should try is if I use my controller. All right. So again, let's just turn this down for a second, and I'm just going to turn my controller on, and let's see what happens here. So there's my controller being detected. Yay. And then if I press play, and I'm going to focus on this guy, and you can see that, oops, you can see that I can move, right, very slowly, but I can move and look at that, and I want to interact, right, so I interact with them, and if I check my inventory, you can see that the inventory is there. Again, I'm using that button on my controller to do that, which is this. Now here's something that I don't need. I don't need to have a mouse cursor when I have a controller. So that's something we can think about later on. Is there a way of getting rid of, the mouse cursor between the controller? Here's something else that I can't do. I can't switch between the two items like before. I can't select them. There's nothing that allows me to move between the items in my HUD, right? So that's something that might be something that I can't. Like, how do I select an item? I don't have that ability to do that with my controller. I do have the ability to do that with my mouse. So this is something else. If we were going to think about controller, access for my inventory, again, can I move my mouse with my controller? The answer is, well, kind of. But we could snap the mouse as an example to each item, and maybe we'll use the D-pad when we're in inventory. The D-pad will allow me to move from one item to the other. Okay, so that's kind of a way of doing that, and that's something that you may want to explore. But for the most part, we've done everything we need to do for this one, so I'm going to put it up on DevOps. First, I'm going to save everything, File, Save All, and let's put that up. I'll say added simple, or we'll say we included simple add to inventory system. That's what we've done. So out of your assignment, we've done two things so far. We've been able to display inventory items for both player and the server, the client and server, and we're able to add an inventory item, a single. We can't add stackable items right now. Next week, when we get together, we'll talk about stackable items. We'll also modify things so that it works with the potions, right? And we'll talk about some issues that we have ongoing with multiplayer. There's a lot of multiplayer issues that'll come up next week because we'll have all these extra things to think about. Questions before we go for the day? And that'll cover everything you need for this week. Take care, Alex. Anyone else?
Could you just hypothetically, could you hide the empty slots in the inventory by using use
Absolutely.
bound with a
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
yeah,
So
okay, that
so
makes sense.
the way to do it, of course, would be inside of the way we build our inventory. So this is a very great way of doing a nice, good question. Thank you for that. So again, remember that we have these two piece parts to this whole thing, right? One piece part is the icon, right? So the icon right now says none, right? So you could make it say nothing. You don't have to make it say anything at all. It could be like right now our item says none, take away the name. That's the first thing. We also made it so that it is gray, right? That's the item we chose. We can make it black so it looks like there's nothing there, right? So,
So we could set material if the item
well,
in
no,
the data isn't bound.
yeah. So, for example, inside of the data table, right, as an example. So I'll do that for you. So let's go to the data table. So under structures, we go to data, item data, right? And you can see that what we've chosen is this gray color for default empty items. So if the item is empty, as an example, it's going to be gray, right? We can make it so it's black. So we can make it so it's a black item, right? That's the first thing. And then what you can do is you can also change your inventory item so it doesn't have this name. So none goes away. So we don't have text in there at all. So there's no text, right? There's a placeholder for text, but nothing's in there. And then inside of your, let's just make sure we save that. And then inside of my my other widget blueprint, which would be here. So this is the inventory system itself. And there's some, between the two of these, by the way, I'm just going to go back. This one, if I go to the graph, right, set icon is something we should look at because the set icon function, right, does all this. It basically checks to see if it's empty. And then if it is, it's going to say none in the text, right? We can set it so that it's none. That's important. So no text, all right, if it's empty. And then only on hover, right, will it become this gray kind of overlay, right? So when you hover over it, and only when there's an item in there, it's going to appear as that color. That's what this is. This slate gray stuff is like the hover. Notice it's only for hover, not normal or pressed. Normal or pressed can be the actual image, whatever that is, right? And then
Yep.
whatever the image is here is going to be what it's going to be, right? So it's black, right, as an example. So those are the two parts. The other thing we have to check is what's going on in player inventory on the graph side. So on the graph side, what happens is it builds this thing up. So here's where it builds. It kind of adds a new item. It instantiates each of these icons every single time you add something. It rebuilds everything again, right? And so here's where you add a child to the uniform grid based on the inventory. Here's the inventory panel, and this is the item. But nowhere here does it change it to gray. So let's check this out and see what happens now. So if I press play, and if I look at my inventory item, let's look at it for my second player, right? If I pull it up, it's just gray, right? So where did that gray come from, right? Because we didn't say that it was supposed to be gray anywhere, but now at least the words are gone, right? Okay, so we're gonna get back to that. And let's go pick up a shield. There's the shield. So we want these just to go away, these little items here. So where do these items come from? That's the thing. Well, it comes from these inventory items themselves, each individual one. So somewhere we've made changes. If I go back to the designer, maybe, where the button itself is gray. So the foreground and the opacity, all that stuff, it's like a gray button. That's what a button is normally, right? So by default. So normal is black, but the tint is gray. So maybe what we'll do is we'll change it to black. So it's black on black. It's a rounded box. Let's see if that works. And let's try that out. So try it right here just to make sure we don't waste any time. And still gray. right? So this is like where it's adding an inventory item, but that didn't really do anything. Let's see if that messed anything else up. So pick it up. It's one of those though. Yeah, so that looks okay, but that's not what we want. So that is normal. Where else am I setting it to gray? Foreground disabled, pressed, that's tinted, hovered, that's a tint. It's typically this black stuff is where it is. Took away that stuff. I don't think there's another place. Color and opacity. That just doesn't color it out. And then background color. This basically makes it so that it's like thing as well. We tried it. Maybe I'm missing something. Item name. That's just the name itself. The canvas panel. I don't think I have anything else, any gray anywhere. That's just on hovered, but not, and this is only if there's something there. I'm wondering if it's a default somewhere. So slate brush, let's add that. So we have draw as, tiling, mirrored. What about my image? Let's make that black. Let's choose an image. I don't think it should make a difference. There it is. So yeah, because what's happened is the images are, so this is a blank inventory, there we go, and by default it has a default image, right? So if we go over to this now, we'll pick it up and you can see that that comes up, and then you can see that the entire thing is just, you know, something that looks like this. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, so all we did was we changed the inventory item here to make it so it's black, and you can choose whatever thing you want in there as well. And then if you want to tint it, let's say for example you don't want it to be quite black, you want it to be like a, I don't know, an outline or something like that, then you can go in there and basically tint it and add a kind of a something with opacity on it so that it's a very light gray or something like that compared to what this is by default. And that should do it. And I just want to make sure one more thing, if there's another way of doing that, because if I go to my base interactable, yeah, you could also do it here. So you can make it so that you know, your base interactable, it's empty right now, right? And the item name is none, right? You can make this empty but base interactables will be empty, you know, as an example. And because you're adding it in to inventory for the first time, it'll also be empty, and then it'll pick up nothing. Yeah, there you go. Now I'm going to make it go back because, you know, people saw it the other way, so I'm just going to clear this up. So let's just get rid of it. But anyways, that's it. And I'm just going to just remove the image. And if I'm not wrong, let's just check that out. And it should make it so that it is gray again. I think that's the default. Yeah. And then let's put those words back. So inventory item. So that should be none. And then that should be none in there. And then that should be the way we had it before. Yep. There we go. Okay, my friends, that's it. Thank you so much, and we'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. All right, take care. I'll stop recording now.